Hello everyone and welcome back to 2018 because we are making a video reaction, which is something I have not done for a long time, but I found this very quick video on the BBC website. The title of the video is Why the Perfect Mother Ideal Sets Us Up for Failure.
For too long, ideas around womanhood and motherhood have gone hand in hand, which is an issue for those who choose not to become mothers too, since it's presumed they want to. And for those who do become mothers, it's the start of a time rife with expectations and judgment.
Yeah, I think it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is this expectation of women to have children as a default position, and I don't think that's an unreasonable default position to have at all. I think the thing about gender roles and motherhood and womanhood is that you have to remember that it's only very recently that really cheap, convenient, effective birth control has been invented, only in the last couple of generations. So of course there's a bunch of cultural norms that go along with wanting to be mothers and expecting to be mothers. And not only that, there's a lot of female anatomy and female personality, psychology that goes with nurturing and motherhood. It's really, aside from survival, becoming a mother or becoming a father indeed is the only thing that humans have survived to do. Basically, all life, not just human life, revolves around reproduction. So it's not an unusual thing to see this expectation of reproducing. It's kind of the normal thing that the species does, that all living things do.
Shows that mothers who strive to climb the career ladder rather than working out of financial necessity are perceived negatively. At the same time...
Is that true? I don't know. I don't think that's true. I think women who focus on their careers are not usually celebrated, and that certainly if they manage to achieve something great with their careers, then that's definitely celebrated.
They're judged as less committed and motivated.
This is something I've talked about on Women's Hour before, this idea that you should be able to have a career and a family as a woman, and to do both of these things with full competency, which is just, I think it's an unrealistic expectation that women are going to do just as well after they've had children as before they've had children, or indeed to do as well in their careers as their male counterparts who have not needed to take years or at least months out of their career. And it's an unrealistic expectation, I think. And I think the truth is that there's got to be a compromise. Either you compromise your family life, you miss out on a lot of the time that you could have been spending with your family, potentially giving them care that they can't get anywhere else, depending on what alternative arrangements you've come up with. But if you, as a mother, want to spend that time with your family as they grow up for the first few years, or even until they leave, up to 18 years, certainly your career is going to suffer from that, and that's not a bad thing. If that's what you want to do and your career is not your priority, then that's absolutely fine. But certainly there's a compromise to be made, and it's silly to pretend that there's not.
Mothers often therefore feel the need to tone down their ambition so as not to experience the cognitive dissonance of wanting to have both a family and a fulfilling career, as combining both is a constant challenge.
Yeah, why not? Tone down your ambition. I mean, manage your expectations. It seems like good advice. Be realistic about your life. There just are not that many hours in a day to do everything that you want.
Often something must give, and as a result, many women drop out of the workforce or work part-time.
You see this sad music they're playing? It's like sad marimba. Oh, this isn't this awful. Women have to work part-time so that they can be at home with their families. Like, how awful.
Especially if working hours clash with childcare.
This is a choice they're making. This is what they would prefer to be doing with their lives. In a world with, like I've said, with birth control, these are children they've probably decided to have, or at least even if they weren't planning to have these children, they've at least decided that this is what they want to do with their life, and that it's seen as like a sad thing when they have to sacrifice things that are lower on their priorities.
Care commitments. There are expectations placed on mothers to behave in a very specific way, and anything outside these norms is scrutinised. Normative beliefs around parenting, which can have subtle and detrimental effects on a new mother's mental health and well-being.
Yeah, sorry, to get back to what's actually being said, this idea that there are ideas that society has about what makes a good mother and how we should be parenting, and certainly that is true. People will tell you don't give your child a dummy, or don't put your child in that, or give them this, or don't act like that, and certainly any frustration or even rage on the part of the mother is certainly frowned upon. To you had to discipline your child, but not too hard, and you need to deprioritize everything else in your life. And that's certainly a very difficult set of standards, but I don't think that's any reason to get rid of the standards altogether. That these standards exist for a reason.
Despite a greater awareness of gender inequality, women are still pigeonholed as being the primary caregivers.
I mean, why not? I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And pressured to be perfect mothers, which leads to guilt and shame when those...
This whole video is about the perfect mother thing, and I was thinking about this. I think we have an idea of what is the perfect mother, and we also understand that it's impossible to be perfect in motherhood or in anything. That doesn't mean that you can just ignore all the times that you fall short of it, but you need to have a standard to hold yourself to know how well you're doing, and that's a case in everything that you do. We can't just erase the idea of doing perfectly. We can't just get rid of standards of behaviour and these archetypes that we live by of what is a perfect mother who never gets frustrated and uses the perfect amount of discipline and has these perfect children. And certainly there are feelings of guilt and shame when you fail to live up to whatever standard that you're holding yourself to, and that can go too far if you have a neurotic personality or you beat yourself up about these things. But that doesn't mean there's something wrong with the standard. That's almost like a freestanding mental health problem, I think.
Societal expectations aren't met. Women don't need to be the primary caregivers at all from a biological or cultural perspective.
That's true that there's no physical, other than breastfeeding, which can be now delegated to bottle formula. Once you give birth, there's technically no reason why somebody else couldn't take over that process, and technically that person could be a man. In general, I'd say that men are not psychologically or socially prepared for that job quite to the same extent that women are, and therefore they're not going to be quite as optimal as a woman, or in fact the ideal situation would be the woman who gave birth to the child should be the primary caregiver. That would be the optimal situation, but there's technically no reason why that has to be the case. It's just that generally speaking it's going to be more enjoyable for the woman or the mother than would be for the father or the man, and she's going to have the skills that society has prepared her to have, and she's going to have a slightly more favourable temperament that her genes have given her, on average.
Those who give birth may physically have a head start in terms of beneficial bonding hormones, but research has revealed, for instance, that among same-sex male couples, the primary caregiver has similar brain activation and a comparable level of the bonding hormone oxytocin as a birth mother does.
You hear that? A man who adopts a baby, who becomes the primary caregiver, has a comparable level of oxytocin as a birth mother, or as the birth mother of his child. Something that I found interesting about this wording is that comparable level is an interesting way of saying less, a lower level. When you think about it, if the level was the same, they wouldn't say comparable, they'd say it's the same. Or if it was more, they'd say it was more. They're obviously saying comparable because it's less. Men are getting less oxytocin from caring for their child than women are.
Our brains literally adapt to caregiving simply from spending time with our children, regardless of our sex. Caring for our children helps us to feel closer to them. So if only one parent does most of it, it's no wonder the other is subtly conditioned to do less.
Yeah, this is, again, sad marimba music, but this is actually a good thing. This is what an economist would call the specialization, or the division of labor. When you divide jobs into two distinct groups, one person takes one group of tasks and the other person takes the other group of tasks and sticks to those groups, they will get better at doing the tasks that have been assigned to them. They'll become familiar with those tasks, they get better, more efficient at doing them, and as this lady has just said with the sad music, in the case of parenting, the primary caregiver is going to become really good at being a caregiver because of these hormones they're being exposed to. They're going to enjoy it more, which is in fact what many women do find, even if they never expected to enjoy being a mother. Because of this hormonal change that's happening to her brain, she begins to enjoy things that she never enjoyed before she was a mother.
This, coupled with workplace expectations of long hours and presenteeism, means
presenteeism, the assumption that you have to be present at work to do it. Baffling. Everything's got an ism now. It makes it sound bad, doesn't it, when you make a word into an ism?
Means mothers often do more of both the visible and invisible childcare and housework.
My husband was always doing invisible housework. I think all work becomes invisible to everyone else other than the person who's doing it. There's a mental heuristic called "what you see is all there is," which is extremely powerful, and it's very difficult to resist. For instance, if you take out the bins in your house, to you, the person taking out the bins, it's very apparent. You go through the entire process, you see all of the steps of that process, and yet to someone you live with, all they notice is that the bin is not full, by which I mean they will probably not notice, because they never knew that it was full to begin with, most of the time. And even if they do notice that the bin is empty, they will only think of it for a fleeting moment, and they might just forget that it's now empty the moment after they've stopped looking at it. They may think, oh, that's nice that my spouse has taken out the bins, or they may not, because it is invisible. And that's not just to do with housework. Any work can be seen this way. Once you do work, it's visible to you, but not to anyone else. And even if you do something like make a meal and you give it to your family, they'll notice that you've made the meal, and yet most of the work that you've put into it will be invisible to them. Whether you're a mother or a father, by the way, this is just true. What they won't have seen is all of the planning that takes, all of the shopping, all of the preparation of deciding what to make, all of those decisions and these jobs that go into making it. They may not see everything that goes into that. For this reason, if you ask couples which of you does more of the housework, or to estimate how much work that the other person does, it's going to be inaccurate, because of this invisible nature of things that other people do. Even if you notice some of it, there's something called a toupee fallacy, where kind of like what you see is all there is. People think that because they have noticed some things, that must be all the things that exist. So if you have to estimate how much housework your spouse does, you will, because you can think of a few times you've seen your spouse do housework, you will imagine that those are the only times that they do housework. And that's the case whether you're a wife estimating the amount of work that your husband does, or if you're a husband estimating the amount of work that your wife does. And if you start to really internalize those assumptions about your spouse, it can really cause trouble in the marriage. And I think this is a really insidious thing to tell married couples, is saying, you're the one doing the invisible housework, that's why he never notices. To tell women that not only that they are doing more work than their husbands, but they are also going unnoticed when they do this work, I think this is a really awful thing this is an awful idea to put in women's minds.
We need to rethink the idea that a good mother must sacrifice all her own time for her children. This is largely a societal Western construct.
Societal Western construct.
Rethink what?
It's it's a way of saying that something is bad without having to say that it's bad.
Societal Western construct. In the Aka tribe in Africa, for instance, it's the fathers who do most of the soothing at night and spend an equal amount of time with the children, giving
If that's true, that's the exception, not the rule.
infants their own nipple to suckle on if they're restless.
My husband does this with his finger when the baby's crying. I think that's weird. Like if the baby will suck on, a finger or a soother or dummy, whatever you call it. I don't know why it has to be the man's nipple.
And women also take part in the hunting. Research also shows that parents are less happy than non-parents, largely due to child-centred and intensive parenting ideals. Sleep deprivation, guilt and worry, a loss of freedom, and being pushed into typical gender roles were among the cited reasons for this.
These days it's pretty common to attribute mental well-being or lack thereof to the expectations that are put on us by previous generations, by society, by our culture, and the social norms that are built around us. And I think that's one way of viewing things, but I think it's worth remembering that we've been told that this is the case for so long that I think it's worth re-examining that assumption and wondering if it might rather be a lack of social norms and boundaries and firm expectations that introduces all of this chaos and uncertainty into our lives, where we go through our entire childhood and adolescence and adulthood in some cases not knowing exactly where our life is going and not knowing what to prepare for, so that women who are of child rearing age, they get into their 20s and sometimes even into their 30s, thinking that they don't want children, not preparing for that, not being interested in that, and especially not even having the opportunity to see other women being mothers, to see their own siblings, for instance, being raised. People have smaller families these days, so we don't get the benefit of seeing our siblings, our younger siblings being raised, and we don't have the benefit of seeing older siblings going through the parenting process before us. So I think a lot of times people don't spend any time with children until they have their own, and they don't know what to expect, they don't know what to prepare for. And I think it's worth examining this as a source of anxiety equal to or even greater than this idea that it's the expectations of others that's making us unhappy when you become parents.
So until we change how society views motherhood, equality will be impossible to reach.
We need to, I don't know what this woman is suggesting, that we need to see motherhood as completely detached from womanhood, which I think is just a denial of biology and psychology. If something can be attributed to social norms or culture or social pressure, expectations, for a long time that has resulted in the assumption that those things are not biological. These social norms can't be biologically based because we see so much evidence that they are promoted by our cultures. And I think it's possible that it could be the exact opposite, and that social norms are informed by our biology. In fact, I've gotten into the habit of assuming that is the case rather than assuming the opposite, rather than assuming that things that are cultural are therefore not biological. Whenever I see a cultural norm, I'll usually start looking for an explanation for why that might be caused by our biology and our innate psychology. Our culture is not just completely arbitrary, it's been built over time, over hundreds of generations of experience of people who have gone through life, had their own children, gained all of this wisdom through living and try to pass it on as best they can. And sometimes that looks a little arbitrary to modernize, especially when we have this technology, things like medication and hormone treatment and birth control pills and contraception, that we think is an excuse for why we don't need to listen to this wisdom from previous experiences, don't need to think about the cultural norms that have developed over these hundreds of generations. But I think that's a little arrogant on the part of modern humans to think that we're the first people who have ever gone through these experiences. You know, that these women are the first women who've ever not wanted to be mothers when they're in their 20s. Putting aside this one exceptional culture that the video brings up of a tribe of people who apparently do not have gender roles when it comes to parenting, I think it's safe to say that for most people, or certainly for all of our ancestors, women have been the primary caregivers, and women have adapted to that role, not just in our bodies but also in our minds. And the culture that we live in is also been evolving and adapting, optimizing the gender roles for the raising of children, which is arguably the most important thing that a culture can do successfully. It's really the only defining factor in whether a culture thrives or dies, is how well we do at raising the next generation, and also raising that generation to raise the generation after that, and so on and so on. But I guess that's all I have time to say today, so I'll thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you again soon.